All right, we will go ahead and get started. Welcome, and thank you each for joining us. I have been so looking forward to this day and this time together. I'm Kelly Hare, and I direct the Boone Center for the Family. And on behalf of the Boone Center, the School of Public Policy, and Pepperdine Libraries, we are pleased to hear from best-selling author and Washington Examiner columnist Tim Carney as he shares with us from his recent book, Family Unfriendly, How Our Culture Made It Hard to Raise Kids Today. Did I get that right? No. How our culture made raising kids much harder than it needs to be. There it is. Okay. This partnership is truly a family affair. Peggy Grande on the board of the School of Public Policy and her mother, Susan Giboney, on the board of the Boone Center for the Family, brought this book to our attention, Pete Peterson and my attention. Today, we will hear from Tim. Tim and I will share in some discussion, and we'll conclude with Q&A. Personally, I cannot tell you how many dynamics in my own life appear on the pages of Family Unfriendly. As a mom, my kids are ages 2, 3, and 5. I've had a growing and nagging sense that I've voiced at various times. Raising a family is so much harder today, or than it needs to be, but I've struggled to articulate why. And after reading this book, I know why and have some strategies around what to do about it. I can't tell you how known and understood I felt when reading Tim's description of car seat hell. And I'm going to read to you a few sentences. So here's the quote. You need to dig your hands under your kids' butts into some sort of slurry of goldfish, toddler saliva, and butt sweat. And may I add, possibly a potty accident in their pants. Yank out the buckle, and then get the 2 other straps. If you own a minivan, which we do, you might be doing this while standing in the middle row. Or, I'll add, if you have rear-facing car seats, you might be standing in the trunk, leaning over the back seat and doing this buckling. Or if you drive a Toyota Camry, which we do, and I'll advance the slide, though you're contorting your back to reach into the back seat to pull off this feat of dexterity, which of course it's so worthwhile, but it is actually very difficult to get those seat belts buckled and dig your hand in between the car seat and the booster seat to do so. Yet in all of this, the significance of identifying all that is family unfriendly in America today lies in understanding how it's contributed to today's current and full-fledged baby bust. How we're struggling to live out God's command to be fruitful and multiply, which Tim argues is the most significant upcoming story of the next 30 years. Please join me in welcoming Tim.
Thank you for the great illustration there. Thank everyone for coming. Thank you to the Boone Center and the School for Public Policy and Pepperdine for having me. And it's, as a journalist, we often write about things we don't necessarily know what we're talking about. Some of you may have noticed this, but this was a chance to write about parenthood was a chance where I thought I actually had a chance to write about what I know, because my wife and I, we have 6 kids. So I think I have probably changed more diapers than 99% of American males, and probably more than 5% of American females. But I remember very clearly my first day as a parent. And any of you who have kids, you remember when your child was born, all of these moments from this, from the labor and delivery, and then we moved over into sort of a makeshift maternity ward at the hospital. And I know that labor and delivery is not easy for women, but nobody ever talks about how hard it is for the men in this situation. And that night, so my wife has like a bed she can sleep on. I'm basically sleeping in a chair that looks like this. It's like a recliner, right? That's supposed to, so yes, I'm there struggling, suffering, not sleeping. Katie was actually asleep, and they took the baby out into this makeshift nursery in the hallway. And I couldn't sleep. The emotions of that night I describe as being overwhelmed with the burden of love. And I think you all, if you have children, you know what that means. And so I walk out in the hallway, and I can picture in my mind this very moment of staring down at this baby's face, this perfect little face, and just thinking, what is she going to look like when she's older? Is she going to have a bunch of younger brothers and sisters? Will I convince her to be a Mets fan? As I'm going through all of these thoughts, that's when the nurse comes up and taps me on the shoulder and says, "Sir, your daughter is 3 bassinets over that way, and you're currently staring at someone else's child." And the point of this, and I do sometimes wonder what happened to that other person. Maybe one day we'll meet her. But the point of this is we were in this weird makeshift nursery because in 2006, there was a record number of births. Not a record number, the second highest number of births ever in the United States history, just below the peak of the baby boom. And it kept going. Because in 2006, everybody had babies. Those are the celebrity Tom Cruise and Angelina Jolie. No, did I get that wrong? Yes, Tom Cruise and Katie Holmes, Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie. Britney Spears had a baby. Heidi Klum had a baby. Everybody was doing it. So then it became popular. Next year, everybody got on the bandwagon following Tom Cruise, Brad Pitt, and me, and we had a baby boomlet. This broke the record of births per year in that had been set in the baby boom. And I mentioned Britney Spears there. The millennials were just entering prime years of family formation. And so we were supposed to have a 21st century baby boom. We, of course, did not. Every year since 2007, the number of babies born in the United States, just about every year, has gone down, from over 4.3 million babies to under 3.6. And again, this is while the percentage of the population, the numbers in their 20s and 30s who are in prime childbearing years, while that number is growing, the number of babies born is falling. So the best measure of the birth rate is the total fertility rate. This is a modeled number that measures how many children a woman will have in her whole lifetime. Now, that slide that I took from the Federal Reserve, it's a little exaggerated. Our birth rate's not going down to 0, but it has gone down to 1.6 per woman. That red line is what is called the replacement level. If the population has 2.1 babies, it will maintain its population forever. If it's below, it'll shrink. If it's above, it will grow. We peaked above replacement in 2006, 2007, and now we're way down below to 1.6 children per woman. One result, we now actually have fewer children in America today, not just as a percentage, but the raw number of children in America is shrinking. There's fewer in this last census than there was in the previous census, and that will continue. I said the baby bust started in 2008, so that means it's about 16 years old now. This next graduating class, these next two, that will be the peak. After that, high school graduates across America, the number of kids graduating high school will go down every year for the foreseeable future. So this is definitely a full-fledged baby bust, and it's unprecedented in the United States. Here's another result. So this is something demographers use. This is the age of Americans. Up at the top is the oldest, people 100 and over, not very many of them. The two different sides are male and female. Down at the bottom is people 0 through 5. This is called an age pyramid, but ours has a narrow bottom. This is like an age onion in the United States. So that's another one of the consequences. So you talk about a baby bust long enough and people get a little uneasy. The Prime Minister of England, when he was asked, he says, we have low and falling birth rates and it doesn't seem to turn around. What are you going to do about this? And this is a guy who is like in the middle of creating new speech codes in the UK, all sorts of things, micromanaging every aspect of people's lives. He goes, I'm not going to dictate that people have kids. And that's what they think. If you start talking about low birth rates, it makes people uncomfortable because it's an intimate, personal thing. And it can sound to people like I'm trying to say everybody needs to have 6 babies or more. And so this is an example of that reaction. This is a Twitter interlocutor of mine, a feminist writer. We go back and forth about a lot of stuff, very friendly. And she says, Considering that overpopulation is quite literally killing the planet, what does it matter to you that the birth rate is down? Why do you insist on more births? So this is this sort of knee-jerk reaction, sort of, don't tell me what to do. A reasonable sort of American mindset, and the fact that I'm a dude talking about this and the childbearing stuff is primarily done by women, they get uneasy. Here's another journalist who, she was reacting to a paper. You're not supposed to be able to read those charts, don't worry, but she was reacting to a paper with these charts. The economist was named Melissa Carney. Her name's pronounced the same as mine, spelled a different way. She wrote a great book about the importance of having two parents. But a separate study she did found that economic factors really don't do a good job of predicting where the birth rate is falling the most. Where student loan debt went up more, you didn't see a bigger drop off in birth rate. Where the cost of childcare went up, you didn't see a bigger drop off. These economic factors didn't predict it. And so Lydia DePillis, another feminist journalist, said, surprise, surprise, younger women might just want more out of life than just children. And so if that's all it is, if just choices, why should I care? Why is it our business that Americans are having fewer children? Well, I have 4 answers to that. General categories. Number 1 is the economic argument, that when we have fewer young people, we end up soon with fewer workers, but at least in the short term, a lot more retirees. That's bad economically. That's what I lead with, but I don't think that's by far the most important. Number 2 is that actually women do want babies, despite what the average journalist might say. They're still kind of in fashion, the whole baby thing. Number 3, the baby bust reflects something unwell about our culture. That's probably at the heart of my book. And number 4, I will argue today that babies are actually good. So we'll get to that much later. So this is this age onion. We currently have more Americans in their 60s than we do under age 10. And that's just going to get worse and worse as the bottom of that figure there narrows even more. So what does that mean 20 years from now? We're going to have a lot more retirees than ever before, and a lot fewer people who could potentially even be in the workforce. And so right now, the working age population has already flatlined. That's for some reason, the OECD starts at age 15, but you can kind of get the same idea. It would be slightly lagging if we started at age 18. The number of people between the ages of 18 and 55 will soon start going down. That's not good for the workforce. People talk about Social Security and Medicare. That's true. Those things, they rely on today's workers to fund today's retirees. But in some ways, that's almost just a reflection of the deeper economic problem. Because if you ask Paul Krugman, he says, we can just print more money. And just increase the size of the Social Security benefits. Don't worry about the fact that the money's not coming in. But that hides the fact that money, income, taxes, spending, all of that is just, it's I think of Plato's cave. It's an image on the wall. It's a reflection of the truer things, which is people actually doing work. Productive activity is what makes us wealthy. That's how we get stuff. That's how we get stuff done, is people do services and people make things. And when we have fewer people to do services and make things, we'll be worse off. And economist Alan Cole put it well, neither private savings nor government pension schemes work unless there are enough workers to meet the needs of older Americans. So yes, we'll have increases in productivity. Artificial intelligence will replace some jobs. I personally do not count on Google Gemini to be changing my bedpans when I'm older. But, and the fact is that we will have fewer and fewer people and of working age while we have more retirees, at least in the short term, and that's negative. So that's the economic argument. More importantly, for now at least, people still want kids. So Gallup has asked American adults for decades, what is the ideal number of children to have in a family? It was between 3 and 4, and then the birth control pill as it gets widely adopted, it drops down to between 2 and 3 children. And it stayed there. It didn't keep falling. We still want, on average, more than 2 children. In fact, it's going up. The most recent number was a recent high of 2.7, and it's part of a general upward trend. So we want 2.7 children, but we're getting 1.6. That reflects a problem. And this next chart is another slightly complicated one, but this is different estimates. This is by a demographer named Lyman Stone, and he said, okay, if you take the actual lowest end estimate of all the polls, how many children does the average American woman want? And so not just the ideal, but for herself. And it averages out to about 2.3, slightly lower than that 2.7 because of different math. But then the next question that a lot of people ask is, how many do you intend to have? So that top line is the desired. The orange line is the intended. So that is a big divergence in recent years. A lot more people are just saying, well, I'm just not going to get the family I wanted. And then the black line below that, the black lines below that, are the actual. So we have our ideals, we set our goals lower than those ideals, and then we fall short even of those lowered goals. And people not getting what they want is part of life, right? Like, I just bought a house. I wanted a big wraparound front porch. I didn't get it. Nobody's writing a book about why don't we have more wraparound front porches or whatever. But this is not just a superficial thing. It's not just a material thing. These are deficits in the things that matter the most. And it's not a hyperbole. The things in this world that matter the most are the people we love. When Christ was asked what's the greatest commandment, he said, love God and love your neighbor as yourself. And so the very closest neighbors we have, that's what we have a shortfall in. We have a deficit of flesh and blood. And that, I argue, is really something to worry about. So to take a quick pause, if this is true, if we want more kids, why aren't we having it? Some economists say, well, people say they want more kids, but they reveal preferences. That's the term they use. It's like if you ask people on a survey, like what sort of food would you like to see at the restaurant you're going out to, people will put healthy food, and then when they get there, they order the fried chicken. So they're revealing that they really want the unhealthy food. And so a lot of economists say, well, people say they want kids, but really what they want is vacations, flexibility. They want the liquidity in their savings. They want to spend more time with their one or two children. So I don't accept that. And in the book, I argue that actually people they're choosing to have fewer kids. Some of them are wanting fewer kids, but that we're really falling short in important ways. And the answer to, if we want more kids, why aren't we having them, is very important. So I traveled all over the country for this book. It was a great experience. I loved to do it. And I went to places with really low birth rates and places with relatively high. Utah is well above average. It's typically in the top 5 states as far as the birth rate. Salt Lake City is falling, though, as rapidly as its birth rate, as it's secularizing. It's becoming less and less of the population is LDS Mormon church. And so I walked around this one neighborhood that looked like it would be a great place to raise kids. There were like single-family homes, there were trees, yada, yada. I walked around the whole neighborhood, and in hours I saw 0 families. And finally I saw this one couple, looked to be in their early 30s, and I said, hey, I'm here, I'm writing about family, can I talk to you about this? And they said, well, we don't want kids. I was like, I'm not like selling them or anything, but no, just said, we don't want kids. I said, now or ever? They said, ever. I said, why not? And she said, we can't afford them. Kids have become much less affordable. I said, exactly how? And the guy, Isaac, said, well, healthcare, everything, but if I'm being honest, I'm really just being selfish. And then he said, Nicole and I always joke that someone somewhere is cleaning up vomit and watching Teletubbies, and we're going to be drinking margaritas in Paris. And then at that moment, and I'm not joking, a neighbor came up pushing a double stroller, and both of the passengers in the double stroller were Chihuahuas. So I walked away from this conversation with my head reeling, because it's like a scene out of like Children of Men. Have you guys read that book or seen that movie? But then also, why would you go to Paris to drink margaritas? And it took me a while to catch that one. But then, those two answers that he gave, affordability and selfishness, they are the most common answers I get when I ask around America why people don't have kids as much anymore. And I argue that there's something else, which is that our culture is falling short. So I'll go quickly through the affordability. We can talk about this more. But we had more babies during the Great Recession than we do now. We had more babies we have fewer. Basically, 2019 was our best economy we've ever had in our life, and that was the lowest point of our birth rate until now, which is basically just about the best economy we've had in our life, and now we have the record low birth rate. So over time, being richer does not make us have more babies. Again, that chart from The Economist, Melissa Carney, found geographical variations in affordability did not predict geographical variations in birth rate. Big asterisk on this. The cost of owning a home has gone way up in the last 4 years, and I think that does contribute to the baby bust. But the baby bust is 16 years old, and this housing price problem is relatively younger, so it can't explain the whole thing. Again, we can talk about that in the questions. This is a chart showing that the millennials, despite everything they tell you, are not in fact poorer than the older generations. And Gen Z is about as wealthy as the millennials at a given age. So the birth rate is falling despite the fact that the subsequent generations are not getting poorer. This is a slightly more complex chart. Those bars represent how long the median male worker has to work to afford 1 year of raising a child. And it's actually getting more affordable, fewer weeks, from the peak of 14 and a half down to just over 12. Fewer weeks per year coming down. So as children get more affordable, we're nonetheless having fewer of them. I'm not saying cost doesn't play a role. And in individual cases, it obviously does. In home ownership, it obviously does. But I am saying this is not an adequate explanation for our baby bust of 16 years. So what about the other one, selfishness? I don't have a chart for this slide, but if I did, selfishness starts at 0, Adam and Eve eat the fruit, it goes up to 100, and then it flatlines. We are not more selfish species in 2024 than we were in 2006 and 2007. But how do we handle selfishness? What we do as a culture, a society, a civilization is, well, we build culture and civilization to offset our selfishness, to channel our personal desires towards the common good, to rearrange, to align our short-term goals with our long-term interests. And so we're failing at that. It's a cultural failure to align what's in the interests of the broader culture and of the individuals with what people feel they should do in any given moment. And as another point that the culture is the explanation, this is a chart of the wealthy countries in the world and their birth rates. And the lowest one there is Korea, with well below 1 baby per woman. And then the far right, the country with the most babies, 3, that's Israel. It's not wealthier than the other wealthy countries. It's not poorer than the other OECD countries. It's not more or less educated. It's about equal, average on all of those. Its welfare state is about average for all of those, and I have all the numbers in the book. But culturally, it's very different from Europe and the United States, and they're the real outliers when it comes to birth rate. So, returning to why we should care about this, it's reflecting that our culture is failing. And obviously, we're not the only one, lots of others, but that it's possible for a culture to welcome and foster more children. And this is evident not just by looking at Israel, but looking at the family-friendly subcultures in our broader family-unfriendly culture. So in the book, I talk about, well, the Jewish neighborhoods where everybody, they walk on the Sabbath, so they all would live within walking distance. I talk about the big Catholic circles that my family and I run in, where it's just sort of, it's a little more normal to have a bunch of kids. I say pregnancy is contagious. If you're surrounded by people who have 3 or 4 kids, it just seems more normal. And that's a lot of the reason people had that 40 years ago, and it's a lot of the reason people don't have it anymore. And there's lots of aspects of cultures that lead people to have kids that aren't directly tied to economics. Okay, so one way our culture is broken, parenting culture. We are over-parenting. So this is a data point. It's just one data point. It's not the most important one, but while dads are spending more time on their kids, which is a good thing, while women are free to spend a lot more time in the workforce than they ever have in the past, which is very liberating. It reflects equality, great. Women are also spending much more time on just parenting tasks than their mothers were. And this isn't like the whole family's hanging out and eating dinner. This isn't cooking dinner. This isn't, going on a hike with your kids. This is like just driving your kid to ballet practice, or just putting on their boots when they're going to go out sledding, and that's probably about 8 of those 12 hours per week if you've ever. I guess you guys don't really do so much of the sledding stuff out here. Gosh, the snow gear on a 2-year-old is it's like purgatorial. It's miserable. So why are we spending so much more time on our kids? A lot of people actually think this is good. They say the low birth rate and the high intensity parenting are good. They call it a quantity-quality trade-off. Now, as somebody who went the quantity route with my children and is from a big family as well, it makes you bristle a little. But it's not just a slightly obnoxious way of phrasing it. I think it's dead wrong. But again, Isabel Sawhill, an economist at the Brookings Institution, who I respect quite a bit, she praised this quantity-quality trade-off. She thinks it's good that people are having fewer kids, as she puts it. With fewer children to support, parents and society can both invest more in each child, helping them to climb the ladder and become productive citizens in their adult years. That sounds great. If the alternative is you have 12 kids and you neglect them all, that's not good. And that's sort of the trade-off that they think they have here. But that's not, in fact, what we're doing. The high-quality parenting is not, in fact, high quality. We have an epidemic of childhood anxiety right now. And the leading cause, according to this article in the Journal of Pediatrics, is a lack of independent, unsupervised play. That is, kids are supervised too much. Kids' schedules are detailed down to the minute. This makes a parent stressed out, but more importantly, I argue, it makes children more anxious. I suspect it also contributes to the low and falling birth rates, but even if it doesn't, it contributes to this epidemic of childhood anxiety. So the low and falling birth rates are contributing to this. Because if you have 1 or 2 kids, you think you can pull off this quality over quantity thing. And there's a joke, and in fact, I think it was first told to me by a guy I played intramural and pickup basketball with in college, whose 2 of his children are right here. He said, once you have child number 3, and that would be you, right? Once you have child number 3, you have to switch from the man-to-man to the zone defense. And then I realized once you have child number 4, you just walk off the court and you let them do whatever the heck they want. And I wrote an op-ed on this for the Washington Post, and I titled it, "Make Your Life Easier, Have at Least 4 Kids." And they gave it the headline, "The Ideal Number of Children, 4." And at first said the ideal number of children, 4, and my son Sean saw it and said, "What the hell, Dad?" Because he's number 5. And I made them add at least 4. But anyway, it sounded so preachy. There were 20,000 comments on the article. They were not all positive, shockingly, in the Washington Post. But part of the upside of a big family is you lose the illusion of control. And the illusion of control is both a cause and an effect, I believe, of smaller families. And another part of it is what I call the travel team trap. That local Little Leagues get replaced by expensive, intensive travel sports that are harmful in all sorts of ways. And this is how the book starts, is my son's coach. The one year we made a mistake of putting him on a travel team, the coach saying, in the first winter workout, now this is baseball for 11 and 12-year-olds. They shouldn't be doing January workouts, in my opinion. But the coach starts it by saying, baseball isn't fun. Winning baseball is fun. And again, these are 11-year-olds, okay? And I said, Katie, this is a big mistake. And she's like, we already paid the $800 instead of the usual $150. And then she says, well, Tim, every bad thing that happens this season will be good fodder for your book. So that was the upside of the travel baseball trap. But it disrupts the family culture if you're going every other week. On the East Coast, I always say 3 states away, but you guys have such big states out here. But if you're going, halfway across the country on a travel tournament every long weekend, it disrupts communities because the leagues aren't as community-based, and it adds to childhood anxiety. Children who specialize, who give up other activities in every other sport and play a sport for at least 10 months out of the year, one of these studies found. Because if you look at my book, the endnotes, there's 500 endnotes pointing to studies. Specializers have a lower sense of self-esteem than children with more expansive, diverse childhoods. In part because their parents pour so much money into, I'm going to make you the best softball shortstop in all of California, and then they rise up through the ranks, and eventually they're playing in some tournament, and they realize there are 1,000 girls better than me at shortstop. And this is what my parents have spent my whole youth building me up to be. So they attach their self-worth to achievement in sports instead of attaching it to truer, more valuable things. So that's part of the broken travel culture. Helicopter parenting. Here I quote my wife, Katie. She's less free range than I am. And so I'll tell her afterwards that I let the kids do something that she wouldn't have let them do. And when she gets upset, I said, they're not going to get kidnapped. She says, I'm not afraid of kidnappers. I'm afraid of Child Protective Services. And it's sadly not just a joke. That couple there, they lived in our old neighborhood. Those kids there, their parents got arrested because at age 10 and age 6, the parents let the kids walk to a local park. They didn't have to cross any big roads. It wasn't a dangerous neighborhood. But the police thought it was inappropriate to let a 10 and 6-year-old walk to the local playground unaccompanied. That's part of a family unfriendly culture. And speaking of walking around, my favorite chapter title is, if you want fecundity in the sheets, you need walkability in the streets. That is, I think that we would have less stressed out parents and bigger families if parents weren't constantly having to drive their kids everywhere. There's the car seats, there's the getting up and going, there's the making all the schedules work out. When your kids can walk to a pickup basketball game, first of all, there's more likely to be a pickup basketball game. There's more likely to be kids in the street. And so lower walkability is this horrible downward spiral. And so this is something that I didn't expect to focus on. Walkability seemed sort of like a niche concern to me, but I really think it matters here. Another thing that's totally broken is modern dating. Now, sometimes I speak to groups that are entirely undergrads, and I have to explain to them how we did it before there were these horrible apps. I threw myself a 25th birthday party where I met my wife. But it wasn't just a birthday party. I had made a New Year's resolution to throw a party in my house every month in 2003 with the intention of meeting a wife. Because if I walk up to a girl in my house and like, hi, I'm Tim, welcome to my house, I'm not a creepy guy. So that was the whole plan. And it worked. One day, I told one girl to bring all her friends, and then one of those friends was Katie, and now we have 6 kids and 2 dogs. And one guy said, I feel like you guys browsed, we search. That is, we check off little boxes on these apps, and we eliminate people who don't meet all of our standards. I promise you, my wife would have checked off, like, has to be at least 6 feet tall, shouldn't be prematurely balding in his 20s, and I never would have made the cut. But these apps also break our brains because they make you demand sort of double secret consent, as I put it. You have to have permission to ask the girl out before you can ask her out. And so then to ask a girl out in any other setting seems inappropriate. One guy said there's this girl he wanted to ask out on his volleyball team, but he thought it would be inappropriate to do it because they met through the volleyball team instead of through a dating app. And so if you are on a co-ed volleyball team, the point of it is to meet somebody of the opposite sex. It is not volleyball. Let me make that very clear. I got a lot of stuff I can do because I do think I want to get to the question. So the dating apps reflect, I think, a deeper sadness and a bad understanding of relationships, of marriage, of human sexuality. I talk about that a lot in the book. And I think they reflect an atomized anthropology, a belief that humans are just individual, free-floating, atomized bundles of rights that, will bump into each other, engage in, in contracts. Everything has to be totally autonomous and consensual, and those are the only rules. And it neglects the fact that we are ultimately relational creatures. And that really gets in the way of parenting. Because, as a wise woman once said, it takes a village to raise a child. We need community support. It's not supposed to be an individualistic undertaking done by 1 or 2 parents. So Stephanie Murray, a very good parenting writer, described the current mindset and said, children are a personal choice and therefore a personal problem, many people seem to believe. Have as many as you want, just make sure they don't bother the rest of us. And I think that really is part of the mindset. I think it's downstream of a culture that once having kids went from kind of what you do. You grow up, you get married, you have kids. Not everybody does it, but that's a normal thing to do. That's no longer true. It's now agonized over, postponed. It's your choice. You can choose something else. Fine. But then it becomes your problem. And then you think, well, I have to do everything exactly right and give them the best of everything. This is the same mindset reflected by Ron Johnson, a senator opposing a family tax credit. He said, people decide to have families and become parents. That's something they need to consider when they make that choice. I never felt it was society's responsibility to take care of other people's children. Now, is it society's responsibility to take care of them? That's sort of an extreme way of putting it. It is society's responsibility to help parents raise kids. It absolutely is. And it's because raising kids is the most important thing. And we have to sort of be judgmental and come down and say some things are more important than others. But again, if we don't value connection and we just value autonomy, we're not going to do that. So I just want to sort of bring it home with Miley Cyrus. She said, we're getting handed a piece of crap planet. I refuse to hand that down to my child. She doesn't have a child. This is abstract idea of a child. Until I feel like my kid would live on an earth with fish in the water, I'm not bringing another person in to deal with it. This is the deep sadness that's also driving our baby bust. Young people, when you gave up church, you got a lot more fire and brimstone sermons somehow coming into their ears from the major media, the social media, and they think the world is on fire. And the sort of thing that when I was a kid, they used to, this was an op-ed in the New York Times, no problem facing the earth looms larger than the growth of the reproductive rate of the human species. Virtually all human suffering can be attributed to the crushing effect of a population that is too numerous for our planet. If you look, the point of this article was that we should be teaching school kids in the elementary school how bad children are. And the illustration is a bunch of rabbits, because get it, we're breeding like rabbits, they're eating the earth, devouring it, which is a head of cabbage. And the writer, speaking of elementary school, he was a principal of a public school, the John Pettibone School in New Milford. And this is what he was teaching his kids. I visited, and the John Pettibone School closed due to low and falling enrollment 10 years ago. When I visited, it was a John Pettibone Community Center. They had gentle adult yoga and a dog park where the playground used to be. So maybe the Principal Burley had succeeded. But again, overpopulation is quite literally killing the planet. It makes us sad. People, increasingly, just in the last 10 years, more and more say that life is going to get worse. And they say, oh, it's because of climate change, it's because of pollution, it's because of whatever. And Ezra Klein, a liberal writer, was like, well, the world's not really going to get worse if you live in like a wealthy country like the United States. What happens is you just feel guilty. You feel guilty for all of the greenhouse gases that you're burning. I think that's partly right. I think that we have a deeper guilt. Again, Miley Cyrus. We don't want to reproduce because we know that the earth can't handle it. What's the it? It's another human being. It's another version of me. It's us. The earth can't handle us. It's a sense that we are fundamentally bad. That's what I call civilizational sadness. I had one woman tell me, do I think people are good? No, I think we're the cancer of the earth. That was her explanation for why she didn't want to have children. Pope Francis said exactly what I'm arguing. Birth rates reflect the happiness present in a society. And I argue that we're not a happy society. What would a happy society look like? The baby boom. Baby boom wasn't just a makeup for babies that didn't happen during the war. Baby boom was an unprecedented, generation-long, massive increase in the number of people having babies, the number of babies they had, earlier move of age at first marriage. Why did it happen? I think it had to do with the same question. It's the flip side of civilizational sadness. Our men got off a boat just having defeated 2 evil empires. Our women greeted them, having just kept the economy going and making all the war machines for 4 years. They smooch on the pier, they go back to the chapel, get married, and they have a bunch of babies because never before and never since has it been so clear that we are, in fact, good. Germany, Japan, and Italy, not only did they not have baby booms, they led the way in 20th century baby busts. Because when they asked, do we think we're good? They said, no, we were the bad guys, or we were the losers. We don't think we're good. Now, I would argue that we are in fact good. I'm not going to take up a lot of time on it, but this is just one demonstration. Human suffering, that red line, people living in extreme, the red block, people living in extreme poverty, it's been going down as a percentage of population for hundreds of years. Who has been improving human condition? It's other humans. So I use the economist's line, the expected value of every human is positive. Not that each human's contributions is positive. We've got the New York Yankees, the San Diego Padres. But if you average them all out, we come out ahead. And yes, that picture is an old one from when I was still taller than all of my kids. But that's in my old parish in Maryland. So I'll just finish with a final story from that. Actually, I got to grab my book to read a quick excerpt here. So we loved that parish in Maryland. We ended up fleeing Maryland for Virginia. But we had a preschool teacher who taught 5 of our kids. And then she finally emailed and said she would miss the last day. And I said, we owed Mrs. Anastasia the grandest of all last day of school teacher presents, because she had taught 5 of our kids. But with her early start to summer vacation, we didn't have time to get anything. So on the next morning, her last day teaching a Carney kid, I brought her the only thing I could. I brought my kids. Mrs. Anastasia opened the door at 7:35 to the gift of Eve, Sean, Meg, Brendan, and Charlie, all beaming. She cried and hugged my crew, her crew. It's common to mock parents for believing their child is God's gift to the world, but very literally, children are God's gifts to us. My children are gifts to others, not because my children are special, but because my children are children. Humans are good. That truth is obscured at times by our own self-absorption or by others' imperfections, but children in their innocence reflect mankind's innate goodness back to us. In one of Charles Dickens' stories about human wretchedness, the protagonist is a kind and generous child named Nell. The narrator, an old man who wanders London alone, runs into Nell when she is lost and in need of help. This guileless cherub gives him her trust and friendship, and so instantly cheers and inspires the old man in a way any reader would understand. I love these little people, the narrator says, and it is not a slight thing when they, who are so fresh from God, love us. And as I felt pleased at first by her confidence, I determined to deserve it. And I still get that feeling, even after 17 years, and even when again and again I failed to deserve it. And yes, it can seem at times that we're not good because we sin, because we're fallen. But I would argue that A, the children reflect back to us the good that's in us. And B, if you want to be a better person, and we all do, nothing will inspire you to do that more than the burden of love of taking on a child. Thank you.
All right. Wow. I just so appreciate your book and all that you've shared with us today. And I say as a parent, parenting is humbling and it is sanctifying. And it does, I pray and trust, it has made me and making me a better person as I'm so aware of my failures and faults and pitfalls and shortcomings. So to jump right in, there's so many things we could chat about. I want to move right to ways forward and ways to help people understand the good of kids and make America a more family-friendly place. I loved your description of a family-friendly feminism, and I want to read a couple paragraphs from the book because I think there's something here that can be very helpful. So again, as we're thinking about how do we make America more family-friendly, and particularly in the workplace, here are 2 paragraphs. Tim writes, "Men can help women here, but not by encouraging their daughters and wives to be brass tacks, hard-nosed girl bosses. We don't need working women to become company men. We need company men to become family guys. Put another way, feminism doesn't help people attain the families they want if feminism means keeping women away from their families. Feminism is helpful if it involves changing men so that they go home to their kids." And it gets real practical. "A man can help working mothers and the young women who want to be working mothers by leaving work at 5 p.m. explicitly to make it home for family dinner or to coach his daughter's softball game. The workplace allies that women need are male bosses and colleagues who say loudly to workers of both sexes, family is the most important thing, and then act that way. This isn't quite about husbands shouldering more domestic duties to boost their wives' careers. This is mostly about men using their cultural power to set the expectations that family is more important than work. The more dads do this, the less employers can punish the moms for demanding flexibility. So in hearing that description of family-friendly feminism, what are some practical ways that we can promote this in the workplace?
So I think this is going to have to be choice of the choices of managers and to set this culture throughout a whole workplace. So I generally have worked at conservative employers, the Washington Examiner, American Enterprise Institute, and they've been very explicit about it. And then I know people who work at religious employers, Catholic University just took huge steps in that direction, but they felt they had to because suddenly they realized, wait a second, we're not, in fact, this optimally family-friendly workplace. So some of the steps to do it are going to be really addressing the material needs of parents. And so I think that parental leave, maternity leave particularly, is very valuable. But that's just a start. Just in general, flexibility for, ranking the value of different activities. So when I was an editor for a little bit at the Examiner, I was always said family's most important. One girl said her father was sick, and I said, go home to Wisconsin. If you can work from there, do it, but otherwise be with your dad. Children, husbands, wives, that's the most important stuff. And one guy said, I don't have a wife, I don't have kids. You also really give people time off for their religious observations. I'm not religious. And he said, is this some sort of like discrimination? And we're an opinion page, so we're jousting back and forth. I said, actually, we value faith and family more than other things. And so you wanted a day off because your British soccer team was in the playoffs and they play at 10 a.m. Eastern and you're going to be drinking in the bar. I gave you a day off. But everybody else gets a lot more if what they're doing it for is family. And so that's the main picture, is just standing up and saying, we have different things that we think are of different levels of importance, and your family is going to be the most important one, and acting that way. And the little material things, and the big ones, the maternity leave, I use the example in there of an employer owning a handful of SNOOs. A SNOO is this bassinet thing that we were too old for, but all our friends
can say.
It's a magic bassinet that makes the babies actually sleep. And they're really expensive. So people either buy them secondhand or they rent them. It's like, this is a perfect thing for a sharing economy. If you employ 100 people, own like 2 of them and lend them out to your employees. And those little things like that, or giving, it's your son's birthday, you get a day off. They send the message. In addition to providing the material support, they send the message of, we really value family, give us a bunch of kids. And that I think employers can do it, but ultimately, it's saying it and living that way, that your family is more important than the job we're paying you to do.
I think also, what is it to count the cost? Like if a person is on board with this idea and says, yes, I want to put family first, and I'm going to leave work at 5 o'clock, what is it to count the cost when maybe their fellow coworkers aren't, and then they may not get the promotion? And I also think kind of along those lines, what would you say to young people today choosing a major, thinking about their future, their profession? Would you limit them in certain fields and say it's better to go elsewhere?
So I'll answer both of those with the same answer. There's an economist, Claudia Golden. She just won the Nobel Prize. And she said the entirety, by her calculation, the entirety of the pay gap between men and women that still exists is due to the fact that mothers want flexibility. And if you demand something like flexibility, you're going to leave some money on the table. Anytime you demand anything besides salary, you're leaving some salary on the table. And so a lot of the modern feminist reaction to that is, okay, well, then we have to make women stop valuing flexibility, and then they'll get paid the same. And that's not my answer. My first answer is, dads should also value flexibility so it becomes more of a norm. And so nobody's going to say, oh, let's stop hiring 30-year-old women because if they have kids, they spend time with them. Well, if you don't have an option, if everybody is valuing it. But also, what if we educated people in high school and college about what sort of fields have more flexibility? Look at Claudia Golden's study, and she says, look, if you're a computer programmer, you have a lot more flexibility. There's not a lot of women in the field, but the women who do get paid the same as the men. It's the exact same. There's zero pay gap because they can work from home. They've got a deadline, and they got to meet it. The first draft of my book, this woman edited it, and she just said, okay, every 10 days I'll give you a new chapter. And I said, when can we get on the phone? And she says, if my children are napping and I am not napping, I might call you. She had total control over her schedule. And I realized that being an editor like that, some of these skills really lend themselves, and career paths lend themselves to flexibility. I have friends who are physicians, they're moms, and they said what they liked about the way med school worked. Now, going to med school really postponed when they could start the family, but after they went through med school and the rounds or the different, you try every different field, they got to say which one of these would lend itself to being family friendly. So one woman becomes a radiologist because it's like, I can work from home. I just get the images and I read them on my computer and then I can do it. And so that education of certain lines of work are more flexible and more family friendly. We're not doing that. And I think if a public school in LA County did that, they would get called like horrible sexists because they're teaching women to be stay-at-home moms or something. But it would be incredibly valuable if we provided that education.
Okay, so the idea that if more people start demanding flexibility, then that could shift a culture and workplaces that people would realize we have to do this.
Yep.
If it becomes a demand. Okay. Similarly, an idea for parents you have, as you mentioned, is increased independent and unsupervised play, which I think is really helpful. And I experienced that personally around other families and moms, or there can be this sense of the helicopter parent. You've got to be watching at all cost. And I'll share this story with you all. I've shared it with Tim. So, true story. I read this book. I was like, this is amazing. Less is more with parenting. Let your kids go and have more space and freedom. So I share this book with my husband, and he's reading the book. And as he's reading the book, it's a Friday afternoon, he's with the kids. He's learning about taking it in, let the kids be more unsupervised. So they're out in the courtyard. The oldest has scissors, we know this isn't going to a good place, to cut the weeds because he likes doing that. And moments later, he comes in, and I've got a slide for you. He's cut his sister's hair. From there to there, I cried. Oh my goodness. So in all of these suggestions, literally, my husband's reading Family Unfriendly, and this is what happens. But you know, as I think about it, okay, so if Nathaniel's freedom, and I pray and trust he grew a sense of responsibility and ownership, that he will be a better person when he's an adult because he had the freedom to experience his agency and responsibility. And I'm going to look at Hannah's short hair for 2 years. So I trust he's going a good path. But what else would you say, Tim, when you think about counting the costs of letting go? How do we do this well? And I'm curious if this is where you've received criticism through your book or not.
You are the first moderator to ever attack me while I was on stage, so thank you.
A child will be better.
No, so I do receive a lot of pushback because, first of all, a lot of people say the world just isn't as safe today as it was when we were children. Broadly, that's not true. The 1970s and 80s, when a lot of us in the room were growing up, was a much, much more dangerous world than today. The crime wave that happened, in 2020 because the kids were locked out of school and the George Floyd protests, that's basically receded almost everywhere in the country. There are parts of America that are more dangerous than they were 10 years ago, but still a lot of those places are safer than they were in the 70s and 80s. The risk of your child getting abducted by a stranger is about 1 in a million. It's the worst thing I could imagine. But if something's a 1 in a million threat, you actually can't prevent against it because it's so random. And so what I would say is that a lot of the things you fear are natural protective instincts, but they're sort of bad risk assessment. Driving your kids everywhere is actually probably more dangerous than letting them run around because being in a car on the freeway is one of the most dangerous things you do with your kids. Swimming pools are also legitimately dangerous. Those are the top 2 accidental causes of death among children. And so, but the other things that we worry about, falling out of a tree, getting abducted, those are absolutely horrible ideas. And mothers mostly think, oh, I would never forgive myself if I let this happen. But the fact is, you can't prevent such rare occurrences from happening, and so you've got to just say, okay, I have to let them go and let them be free. But the other half is not just a fear of something happening, it's the belief that every moment should be optimized enrichment for the child. And that if you're smart enough, you can plan, okay, well here they're gonna, and even when they're in utero and you're playing Mozart for them, I think playing Mozart when you're pregnant is great, just because listening to Mozart is great. It doesn't do anything for the baby, but it's nice. And similarly, teaching, I can teach my 2-year-old to read. There are these programs that do that, and they don't have any long-term benefit. We think that we can control the outcome of our child if we schedule them just right, so we hate the idea of them wasting time. But the wasted time is valuable, and that's like so much of modern psychiatry is people finding out through studies that everything my mom said was right. And that boredom is a muse. It's the muse, as one mom put it. My kids make up board games. They write little novels. They experiment. They learn. They teach themselves to play guitar, or they just invent some stupid game of bouncing the ball off the wall and they play it with their friends for hours. That's fine. That's what childhood is supposed to be like. You cannot prevent everything bad from having your kid, and you cannot, through maximum effort, turn your kid into a total success in life. So relax a little and have fun.
Maximizing everything in the child's world makes me think about birthday parties. So you mentioned the travel team trap. I don't know, I need 2 other B words to go with birthday. The birthday party something that I see it in my own life. And this is a story from this past weekend. I'm watching the kids learn to swim at the Y. There's a bunch of moms sitting there, conversation. She hears that we have 3 kids, and the natural reaction is, oh my gosh, how do you do it? And all of this. And she starts telling me about the stresses of her kids' birthday parties. And she's like, and I got to figure, it's just going to be at the park, but I've got to figure out all of these drinks. And I was like, could you just have bottled water and kids' juice drinks? And she was like, no, we have to have all of these other things. And it was this moment of this is the stress that she's living under. And I get it too. I can feel the pressure. But when people see all the birthday parties on Instagram, then they feel like they've got to have the same birthday parties. And planning a birthday party becomes a part-time job and is miserable in the process. And so it's what is it for us as a culture to say, yes, have water bottles and juice drinks at a birthday party, and that's enough, and that's done well. What is it to lower the bar and the standards?
Yeah, so chapter 1 of the book is called Have Lower Expectations for Your Children. Now, that's half joking, of course. I want my children to be saints. I want them to be men and women of virtue. But chapter 2 could have been called Have Lower Expectations for Yourselves. And later in the chapter on technology, I talk about momfluencers, the people who are posting online and some of it all starts off with a great idea, right? It's like, okay, I did just figure out this one easy, great, quick way to frost a cake, or this is how to make it look like it's whatever the kids want it to look like, and do it easily. But then it becomes this lifestyle. And it always becomes this thing where they try to make it look like they're not trying hard, and they try really hard. And even their houses, when they live in a farmhouse, they all live in farmhouses for some reason, they have the exposed joists in the house. It's this is simple and unpretentious. It's like, you made $10 million off of this YouTube channel last year, and this house is $8 million. This is not simple and unpretentious just because you don't have drywall on the ceiling. And all of that stuff sets these unrealistic expectations for parents. And I did focus groups as part of writing this book, and multiple people who were not parents and thought maybe they would want to but weren't sure, they just said, I want to give my kid the best of everything. I don't just want, I want to give them the best vacations and the absolute best of everything. And in some ways, you should try to give them the best of everything, but not as far as the birthday party that's exquisitely planned and at the best, most expensive place. And so this is where culture and community come in. My wife, we live where she grew up, and it's just sort of the norm among our closer friends that birthday parties are, hey, have your kids come over and we're going to have cake. And it's pretty simple. And if you do it at a park, it's just because you don't want them messing up your house. It's not because it's the most amazing park in the world. But half of our friends, again, it's super high intensity, and you feel this pressure. It's like, they shelled out like $100 for each of our kids, and then we're going to invite them over and just give them the cake we got at Safeway. Like the cultural pressure can be really tough. So embedding yourself in a community that has proper values makes things a lot easier.
Thank you, Tim. Let's go to questions from you all. Who has a question for Tim? Yes, here.
There's
and
Mike.
you'll speak into the mic to help our recording. That would be great. Yes, here.
Just curious about how you're schooling the kids, public schools, private schools, homeschool, because there's so much involved in education today that's so negative.
Yeah, so the question was, how are we schooling the kids? Because there's so much in education that's so negative. And that's exactly right. And it's a huge cost. So we send our kids to Catholic schools. It's what I spend all of my money on. It's not why I write books, but it's why I get paid for my books, is to pay this tuition. But the other cost is that we have to travel to build our community. In other words, the public schools in Northern Virginia and in Montgomery County, Maryland, preach dogmatically a worldview that we outright reject. And we would spend every day trying to counter-program what the teachers are teaching our children about gender, about human sexuality, about marriage, etc. And so it would be a better world if there was just a neighborhood school and our kids just walked there. And that would have tons of benefits if we did that. But we decided we can't do that. So we drive our kids to one Catholic boys' school in Maryland, a girls' school in Vienna, Virginia, a parochial school, and it's expenditure not just of money, but of time. And a lot of people who homeschool, they run into the over-programming problem more than the average person, in part, I think, because at first when they start homeschooling, they start thinking, okay, we can just sign up for everything. Next thing they realize, they have no free time. So by the third kid, they've dialed it down. But a public school that undermines your teaching, if you are a Christian, Jewish, Muslim, Mormon, whatever person who's relatively orthodox, that really is a family unfriendly part of our culture, because there's something great about the local neighborhood public school being a hub of civil society and something you can all lean on, but it's harder today in most of the country. I mean, it's undoable today in most of the country for a lot of people of faith.
Okay, next question here.
So Jonathan Haidt, in his recent book, sort of maps out like the increase in like mental illness and like nihilism, depression in kids with like the rise of like digital life and social media. So I'm curious, like sort of what you think about that thesis as relating to like the increase in like mental illness for children, and like how much of like it sort of seems to me that like parents have overparented when it comes to like going to the park, but perhaps like underparented when it comes to like social media and the iPhone. So I don't know, do you think there needs to be sort of a correction there of like parents need to be more strict about like digital life?
Yeah, so that's, again, I don't argue you shouldn't worry about anything about your kids. Again, drowning, driving, and the internet are the dangers. And every parent I know, so we get together with the other parents in our school and we all talk about, okay, how did your kid get around this internet filter? There was one 8th grader who realized that his whole house had internet filters except for the monitor on some piece of exercise equipment. And so on that, he went and got porn on the internet. Like that, we all know that we're way in over our heads, and we all say, actually, yeah, we need to protect them from this. The girl in our girls' school ran away, and when she ran away, somebody came in and was like, I promise you, she was spending way too much time on the internet, and that's what had happened. And it had just addled her brain. And so this actually is a way in which it is more dangerous today than it was when we were being raised by kids. I think Jonathan Haidt's argument that we're too overprotective about broken arms and abductions and too underprotective about social media, et cetera, is exactly exactly right. Social media for girls creates this problem of social comparison. It's, oh, I missed that party. It's, oh, you know, other girls are prettier than me. Oh, whatever. And for boys, the internet creates the problem of pornography being readily at their fingertips. And both of these things are really harmful for them. And it just drags you away from the family. And the anthropology of social media, I argue in the book, is this isolated, atomized idea where it's just you in an infinite sea instead of you belonging to a hub of civil society, belonging to a family, a neighborhood, a community. And so Jonathan Haidt's also correct that schools have to lead the way. We need support from family. Like I was saying earlier, it's easier for us to not give our kids smartphones because we send them to schools where smartphones are banned. And we know the other parents. And we start conspiring with the parents when they're in 6th grade and say, we're not going to give our kids a smartphone. You don't have to, and you probably will regret it if you do. And then it becomes easier for us to pull that off.
We have time for one final question. Another question for Tim. Yes.
Unwind what their kids are being taught in Catholic schools, and we took the approach, we literally called it a debriefing every single day. And when our son came home from school, we'd spend 1 hour in a debrief. We called it family time, and just talk about what he was taught, what he learned, and how it at times conflicted with what we believed in. Mm-hmm. And I talked to friends about it who didn't take that route, and their kids have, some of them, gone astray. And I just wonder what you tell those people.
Well, I would think a crucial part of the debriefing or the deprogramming or whatever, to use a lawn care metaphor, the house we just moved into is overgrown with all these invasive species. And I tear them up and they just come back. And finally the guy said, if you want to keep out the weeds, you got to plant good grass. That you can't just say, and I have friends who sent their kids to public schools and they tried the deprogramming, you can't just say, actually, no, that's false. Actually, no, that's false. You have to create, and I would argue, a Christian anthropology, a Judeo-Christian anthropology, whatever you want to call it, that teaches them the truth that they're made in the image of God, that sacrifice, laying down your life for others, is the path to happiness, and that we are ultimately relational beings, that we are good but fallen. Making sure they understand all of that stuff can help keep out the bad anthropology, the arguments that rest on bad anthropology. That would be part of it, but also showing an image of what adult life that's based on family and faith can be like. My daughter thinks about colleges she wants to go to. I realized she was thinking longer term than I was. I was thinking of my 4 years in college. She was thinking of, what will my life be like afterwards? Where am I going to come out, get married, have a bunch of friends who get married, who have kids, they go to mass, they have backyard barbecues on feast days where there's a bunch of kids running around, the adults are ignoring the kids and sitting there and drinking beer. Like, that's what she wants. That's her vision of a Catholic adulthood that's very Catholic and very joyful. And that positive image has to be laid out beyond just sort of the rational arguments. And that's why we write books, right? That's why we do culture and art and music, is because you have to show the image of the true, the good, and the beautiful to draw people away from the evil arguments out there.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you so much for sharing with us today and your book. I so appreciate it, and I pray and trust that each of us here in this room will help to create more family-friendly cultures, and there will be more children in the world as a result of those in this room and those that you share this conversation with. Please join me in thanking Tim.